Hello, curious researchers. Today's topic is going to be finalizing a paper, or can be finalizing a thesis as well, but anything that has to do with presenting our results and putting it out there in the world. And an important process, how do you finalize this process in your head? So how I see this is that writing paper is like creating art, because the artist gets to choose when to stop with the work of art. It is the same with your data. So you are the one who produces data or collects data, who does the measurements, who does the experiments, makes simulations, does everything around that is needed to get to present certain results. And you also get to decide which portion of that work you are going to put in a painting. So how is your painting, or in this case paper, going to look like? And of course, this happens in a relationship with our supervisor. We are going to see, okay, this person is going to serve as a sounding board, ideally, to see whether your ideas that you have can fit in a paper, or how to better put them in a paper, or maybe there was something that we didn't see ourselves. So always when we have two brains in the room or more, it can be beneficial to see something that one brain cannot see. So in that sense, this is an invitation really to use your supervisor in this iterative process. Because what I see happening often is that we put ourselves through the agony of trying to finalize all of this process in our head, so to have final paper ready before we present it to the professor. We want to have this perfect piece of art before we show it to the committee, to the advisory board, in this case, our supervisor. So then what happens is that then we start questioning ourselves, how we get more and more in our heads. Then we start questioning, oh, do I have the right results? Then the question is probably going to be no. So then we say, maybe I should try to get better results. And then immediately we go into, I have not done enough. I need to do more. I need to do more of simulations. I need to do more of measurements. I need to collect more data to make this better, to make this perfect. And the fact is that there is no final. From this point, our brain cannot see what is it that is final. What is this perfect piece of paper? It only gives us the input, more. This is not enough, and we need more. So actually, what we do then, instead of writing, we find a way to make ourselves useful. So we procrastinate with writing, but we entertain ourselves with doing more simulations, doing more measurements, gathering more data, so having more and more that we can put in the paper. But this comes from this feeling, this is not enough. This is not good enough. I have not done enough. And then we make ourselves useful. We try to do more simulations. And the point is, it's not about doing more or less simulations, but it's what is the intention behind it. Because we might be doing this from the place, okay, I just need more data, because more data means that the results are better. Not necessarily. So can we make meaningful simulations and meaningful experiments, which don't always mean more? And this internal critic of ours grabs this one little thing, one detail, and then catastrophizes the whole scenario. So then it's like, if I don't check this one more thing, the paper will not be good enough. I cannot write it. It's not complete. So the whole paper goes to waste. Everything that you have done up until this point goes to waste. And then the critic spirals back to all the things that could have been done better. I could have done something better in the past. I could have paid more attention when I was doing my designs and experiments. If you're working in a lab, I could have measured in a different way. I could have measured more. There were also other experiments that could have been done. And this is an endless well. Like in a Harry Potter, when you have this bottomless bag, it is the same thing with these thoughts. It is never going to be enough. And yeah, this might come from the schooling system or family system or any system that transmitted messages that ultimately we internalized and saying, you are never enough. You never put enough effort into things. You always need to do more. You need to prove yourself more. And what happens is that we have this feeling of shame. We feel embarrassed if we have not read all the books, if we have not read all the papers, if we have not done all the experiments in our field of expertise, and we feel like we are not expert enough to show what we have so far. But I would remind you to take into account your experience and where you are right now, because you have probably just finished your master, you have entered this PhD, and it's been a few years that you are doing research. So, in full honesty, nobody is expecting that you are the next Einstein in the first few years of your research. Nobody is expecting that you are going to be the next superstar and change your field of expertise in a few years that you are working on this topic. This, if you dedicate your life to research, or the big amount of your working life to research, this is going to be the work of your life. And this is going to come with a built experience. So I hope that you can at least grasp this and give yourself some credit for everything that you have done so far, because we can catch onto this one little thing and say it's not enough, it can always do more, it can always be better. It's a bottomless pit. And yes, it can be better. And yes, you are already doing things and learning and progressing and moving and doing trials and errors. And it is going to get better and better and better, but it will take time. It will take iterations. Not necessarily time, it will take iterations. That's the important thing. And if we stay in our head with our own iterations, it can be difficult. It can be difficult to get out of this loop that it's never enough, because this is a loop that feeds itself. And if we don't interrupt it with something else, and it's oftentimes it's difficult to do it because we have this mechanism of working. So it's difficult to have another mechanism that is going to interfere with it. But that's why somebody from the outside can serve as a sanity check. So in this case, I really advise you to go and talk to your supervisor. Maybe not about the whole drama that is happening within you if you're not ready to share that. But that can be useful as well if you have a good relationship with your supervisor, and just explain how you are experiencing this process. And you can see how your supervisor sees you from their point of view, because that is going to be quite something different. And oftentimes we are afraid maybe to ask and get this feedback because our feedback is already so dramatic. Our feedback already says, this is not enough, you need to do more, etc., etc. So we expect that the feedback from the supervisor is going to be 10 times worse. And this is already what we imagine. This is really, really deteriorating. And the thing is that in reality, probably the reaction of the supervisor is going to be 10 times more soothing than your own, because we are our biggest critic. We can really put ourselves deep, deep, deep down in this bottomless pit. But we are the ones also who can ask for a helping hand on the outside. And if you don't want to share with your supervisor how you are going through this experience, at least go and see, okay, let's do a reality check. This is where I am with the whole process of writing. This is my first iteration. Can I have the feedback on this first iteration? And maybe saying, I know that this is not the best iteration, but maybe I cannot move further on from this point, and I need your, second pair of eyes to look at it and maybe to pinpoint in a certain direction. Because ultimately, your supervisor is also going to put his or her name on this paper. So it's totally fair to have also the feedback of all the people, not only your supervisor, but all the people who are going to be put on this paper. So instead of just having you write everything and send it out and people give small comments, you can also be the manager of this paper and ask for the input that you need, or comments, or something where you got stuck, or just general feedback on the whole paper, on one specific thing. So you get to choose, like the artist. So you are the artist who gets to choose what kind of colors are you going to use to paint, where are you going to buy these colors, so who are the people that you are going to collaborate with, how are you going to put these colors in which order, etc. And then invite people to look at it halfway and give their feedback to see how they experience it. Because our experience of an artistic image, or in this case, paper, is one thing, and somebody else's experience can enrich that. In our case, when writing a paper, it can definitely enrich when we have multiple brains who are thinking together on the same thing. So going back to spending so much time to make it perfect, you might recognize that this makes you also physically tired. At a certain point, you just want to drop everything and go to sleep. So this physical tiredness is also an effect of all these processes and all these thoughts that are saying it's never enough, makes it very tiring. And on the other hand, if we decide to move just one step at a time without trying to make it perfect, then we can introduce a bit more relaxation and move one step at a time. And it is about having a clear plan in our minds, but not having a perfect plan. So that is a difference. Knowing what to do is different from doing it perfectly. Knowing what to do is making a skeleton of your paper. A skeleton, not a perfect skeleton. It is also inserting the images, writing the paragraph around those images, not making a perfect image and a perfect paragraph around those images. It is also discussing with your professor along the way and not waiting for the perfect final paper and only then present it. So these are the differences when we think about making something perfect and when we think about doing something. Because making something perfect can stop us from actually doing it. If we expect to be perfect, we might give up altogether and never do it. And what makes it perfect, if there is such a thing, is this multiple iterations and repetitions and steps that you actually make along the way. So I'm going to give also an example of dancing, because last year I also was teaching Brazilian Zouk, And I was checking how beginners experience their progress. Because in the beginning, you might like the music, you might like also the movements, you might like interaction with people, but you have no idea what to do. And then you can feel frustrated, right? Because you came there to dance and you are stepping on somebody's toes. You have no idea how to move yourself, your body, and somebody else's body. And this can be quite frustrating. And this is not going to happen in one class that you learn how to do it. But the feedback that I got is that it took, on average, 10 classes where it felt like people were failing every single time. And then they say, and then after 10 classes, all of a sudden, it started rolling, it started being exciting. So the excitement appeared. But in the beginning, it felt like a total failure. So can you approach writing your paper and doing your PhD work in a similar way? Can you allow yourself to feel like you are failing every time for 10 times? 10 times attempting to write a paper and 10 times feeling like you're failing. Only to introduce more and more iterations and to get to the point where this becomes kind of a second nature. Because it is not always going to be like that. In the beginning, yes, but then we are going slowly to get used to it. The resistance is going to become lower and lower, and this is going to become our second nature. Only if we allow ourselves to exit our head, to have a second opinion, to stop this iterative process, to understand, first of all, when this process in our head starts, when we are starting being overly critical, and being gentle with that. Okay, there is this part that is being very critical, and you notice it, and that's okay. It's there. It can be critical, but you can still do something. So it can criticize and say, it should have been not better, you should have done more, etc., etc. And say, yes, maybe I could have done more, but at this point, what is my next step? And one of the biggest allies on this journey can be your supervisor, depending on the relationship you have. But it is in both of your interests to get to a published paper, if we talk about it. Because ultimately, your professor wants to have his or her name on that paper, wants you to succeed, to move one step towards your thesis, wants you to learn how to go through this process of writing a paper, and wants you to feel like you have accomplished something. So for them, it's also not pleasant when they see you struggling. And maybe they don't express it, but if there's a way that they can help you and you can tell them and show them how, do that. Maybe that's too scary, but maybe there is a tiny thing that you can do. Just ask for feedback, or acknowledge that you feel stuck, or acknowledge that it has taken 2 months and you haven't made any progress because you felt trapped in this perfection. Whatever is happening with you, this can be also a pathway of creating a better relationship and also creating a better paper from that relationship. Because, you are going to work together not only on writing this paper, but also on completing your thesis. So I hope that some of these things were useful for you, that you could recognize some of these things, that next time when you notice them with you, you can pay attention to them and just see it as it is. If the criticism appears, okay, it's there. Like adding critic on top of a critic is probably not going to be helpful. I know this from experience. So if in the beginning, we start noticing that we're being critical, and then we're like, oh, I'm critical again. This is just trying to push it away. It's like, no, I don't want to be critical. Now I want to be different. But we are used to operating in one way. So it also takes iterations before we manage to behave or to talk in a different way. Good luck. And I'm curious to hear how you experience this whole process of writing your paper.